It's now my pleasure to introduce our second reader this evening, Jeff VanderMeer. Jeff VanderMeer's most recent fiction is the New York Times best-selling Southern Reach trilogy, which consists of the books Annihilation, Authority, and Acceptance, released in 2014 by Farrar, Straus and Giroux, or FSG. Foreign rights have sold in 17 countries, and the movie rights have been acquired by Paramount Pictures and Scott Rudin Productions. His latest nonfiction books include Wonder Book, The Illustrated Guide to Creating Imaginative Fiction from Abrams Image. His nonfiction has appeared in The New York Times, The Guardian, The Washington Post, Atlantic.com, Vulture.com, and The Los Angeles Times. VanderMeer recently taught at the Yale Writers Conference and has lectured at MIT and the Library of Congress. Please welcome Jeff VanderMeer.
Hello, huddled masses in the dark. A quick note before I start. This is my 75th or 76th or 100th event this year. I don't know. I've been on the road 5 months out of the year, so I'm really happy that I know I'm in Orlando. Also, you may have seen a shot of me with an owl. I would like you to know that ever since I did that event in Philly with the owl at the Academy of Natural Sciences, bookstores at events after have been emailing my publicist saying, "Does Jeff require an owl? Do we need to procure an owl?" In Richmond, they actually procured a plastic owl, which wasn't really the same thing. And I can tell you, having performed with an owl, it is not what it's cracked up to be. The things that owl did on stage, I'll never perform with an owl again. So thank you to Functionally Literate. Thank you to Usman for a great reading. Thanks to the Book Market for selling books at this event, and to all the sponsors, and to you for coming out to celebrate Florida Bookstore Day. As I believe Ryan said, you're all going to hell if you don't buy a book, though it doesn't have to be mine. I would also say, as an aside, that during these 5 months, I have traveled to many, many independent bookstores on both coasts and in the middle of the country as well, and indies are doing incredibly well right now. And I've never seen such upbeat, optimistic booksellers in my life, because booksellers as a clan tend to be a little more closed-lipped and pessimistic about things, as you might expect. But I have heard nothing but great things from indie bookstores all year. Now, I am going to read from my Southern Reach trilogy, which is heavily influenced by the wilderness of Florida. But I thought first I would tell you about the last time I wrote about Florida in my fiction, and why, compared to this time, it all went terribly wrong. And I will also then ruminate a bit on the potency of animal attacks in influencing my Southern Reach novels, because I have been charged by a lot of animals. Animals apparently don't like me very much. So don't tell anyone, but before this series, I was known as a fantasy writer. Please don't tell anyone, because they'll come and take me away, and I don't want to go back there. So my last series was set in a fantasy city, and it featured something called the Festival of the Freshwater Squid, and you are allowed to laugh because it was meant to be kind of Kafka absurd. And as a result, I had a lot of fans contact me about this festival set in this fantasy city. They would send me pictures of squid, as if I didn't know what squid looked like. It turned out there were many types of squid that I did not know about, so I'm very thankful. Less thankful for the dried squid, because I used to get about 10 pounds of dried squid a year. And really, there's nothing that you can do with dried squid except throw it out. And links to squid stories. Anytime a squid washed up anywhere, 70 people would send me the link. "Jeff, this squid washed up. We want you to do something about it. Get on this right now." But I was flattered, people had taken time out from their day of getting groceries or robbing banks or whatever they were doing to contact me, right? So I thought, I'll take this one step further. I've always wanted to write about Florida. At this point, when I did this, I had lived in Florida for over 20 years, and I really wanted to kind of relate that experience directly. And my mistake was I decided to take this Festival of the Freshwater Squid and relocate it in the real world. And that was my mistake. So I created this freshwater squid called the Mayfly Squid, which was an invasive species. My dad's a research chemist who studies invasive species, so I thought this would be good. I invested the story with kind of a Mark Twain kind of satirical bent. So it was both sending up and lovingly talking about Florida small-town festivals. And so I set this festival, the Freshwater Squid, in Sebring, Florida during the off-season. Because I'd visited Sebring, and I thought this would be a nice thing to have in Sebring during the off-season. And so there's a parade during this festival. There are rides. There's a Mayfly Squid Queen who is crowned, who walks down to the lakes with hollow high heels filled with baby squid, which she releases into the lake. I even consulted a biologist so that the science that was mentioned in this metafictional piece was correct. And then it went up on a website in the fiction section, very clearly marked as fiction. And these are the things that happened next. A week later, I got a phone call from an irate cephalopod expert, or as I call them, squidologists, from the University of Texas in Galveston. Apparently the taxonomy of squid is incredibly difficult without me mucking things up with my fake squid, which could set his research back centuries, apparently. So, scarred by this experience, until you've been bawled out by a cephalopod expert, you just don't know what it's like. I put in flashing letters, fiction. I had the webmaster, please put fiction on this thing. And everything settled down for a while. But unbeknownst to me, the Sebring Chamber of Commerce had been getting some mighty strange emails and phone calls. When is the festival? Is it family friendly? Not a lot, but a few of these things were going on, which I did not know about until I got a phone call from the Sebring newspaper to talk about the situation. And so I had to explain myself about this Mayfly Squid and explain that no, there was no such festival and I wasn't planning anything and there were no zoning laws being broken or any permits that needed to be gotten that had not been gotten. And I then emailed the webmaster desperately saying, can you please, in 72-point font, typeface, please put fiction, fiction, fiction everywhere you can on this thing or take it down. So he did that. He put fiction on it. Everything settled down. Then I get this email from the BBC, from a wildlife show producer. She says, I'm not kidding, I still have this email. She says, Jeff, we're going to be in the Everglades, and we saw this thing where you've researched this Mayfly squid, which sounds amazing. What we'd like you to do is we'll pay for you to come down to Sebring, to the lakes, and walk along the lake talking about the Mayfly squid, and maybe we can even get some underwater shots. Now, I had this moment that I would call like a personal, like ethical or moral crisis, where I thought, I know a guy who has a scuba suit. I actually know a guy who makes rubber models of things. And this, you see, I think you know where, right? And then my better sense, or rather my better half, my wife, prevailed upon me, my moral compass, and I did not do this thing. And instead, I told her that I'm really sorry, but this doesn't actually exist, and she was mortified, and I felt terrible. And at this point, we reached an agreement with the webmaster that there was like basically every other word, this is fiction. And even then, it wasn't over, because a year later, I got a message from a Louisiana fisherman on my phone. Don't know how he got my number. Jeff, I'm up here in Louisiana. I found these two really gross things. I think they might be Mayfly squid. I think the Mayfly squid might have made it up to Louisiana. And I never called him back. I never called him back. So that kind of cured me, talking about Florida in my fiction for a while. And then while working on the Southern Reach trilogy, which was inspired by hiking in North Florida, in fact, there's a place called the St. Mark's Wildlife Refuge. And basically the setting of Annihilation, which is about this 12th expedition into this strange, pristine wilderness called Area X that has been closed off from the rest of the world, and there's this secret agency called the Southern Reach sending in expeditions. Well, this is the 12th expedition that's set out in Annihilation. That whole stretch is basically the 14-mile trail, complete with lighthouse that I do out at St. Mark's. And even some of the things that seem weird to readers who aren't from Florida or don't hike a lot are based on my own personal experiences, like seeing dolphins way up in freshwater channels, in lakes almost, because they come up sometimes in high tide. And of course, the first time that you see that yourself, it's a very dislocating experience because your brain is seeing one thing. Like you see this line in the water, like, that's got to be like the line of an otter or something, and then suddenly it breaches and your brain just goes, which is kind of like when I was in Australia for the first time hiking and I saw a flash of brown and my brain said deer and out jumped a kangaroo. And I just stood there like frozen, like I thought I was having a stroke for about 5 seconds. But anyway, so I realized that I had a lot of hiking experiences that might be of use. And although I can't see you that clearly, can you raise your hand if you've ever been charged by a wild animal larger than, say, a squirrel? Anyone? Okay, so yeah, so you know what I'm talking about. God, there's a lot of you. And I don't mean by like your neighbor's dog, but like, really a wild animal. Still, raise your hand, I want to see. Holy crap. So I'm not going to tell you anything you don't already know. Wow, someone needs to write about this. There's got to be a lot of PTSD out there on this issue. Anyway, so there are several animals that have charged me over the years, and some of them are more suitable for fiction than others. For example, me and my wife were charged by an otter. At least I was charged by the otter. My wife thought that it was just trying to make friends. And I convinced her to run because otters are total bastards, for one thing. They're completely just made of muscle. And I know from talking to, for various articles, keepers who have to go in zoos and feed the otters, that they hate this because they're just total bastards. They get beaten up by these things. But basically, if an otter charges you, even though the silhouette of that is not very becoming for you, running from a 7-pound animal, you're doing it in part because you're afraid of rabies or some other disease, and it is darn weird for an otter to charge you, right? However, it is not the kind of thing that you can put in a serious novel. You can put it in a comic novel, but try as hard as I could not find a way to make being charged by an otter dramatic in this serious eco-thriller. Now, wild boar, different story. In fact, the thing I dislike the most is seeing a wild boar in the distance. Give me an alligator, give me a black bear, no problem. But so I was actually charged by a wild boar. There is a scene in the first book where the expedition is charged by a wild boar, and it's more dramatic in the book than it is in real life, because in real life I was hiking with this guy. And we saw what looked like a blood-engorged German shepherd with tusks coming down the trail, and it was one of these things with water on both sides and kind of a raised trail. And we'd been hiking for a while, and we really didn't have any way to go anywhere. And from about 250 feet, we see this blob running towards us. And the weird thing about being charged by a boar from that distance is you have a long time to talk about what you're going to do. It's the most absurd, surreal thing. You're standing there trying to have like a rational discussion while this huge wild animal is charging towards you. You're fairly sure he smells you, but he might just be going for a long jog. You don't know, but you have to prepare in the meantime because maybe he's not. So we assessed our weapons, and I had a tiny gutting knife, which is great for perforating things that have half gored you to death already. And my friend, who purported to be ex-military, had a walking stick. And he was doing this. And not giving me much confidence in his military training. So the thing's coming closer and closer. We're still having this absurd discussion about what we're going to do. And obviously we're going to stand our ground. And I'm already in this position where I'm extending my gutting knife to try to make of my arm a sword. So maybe it will pierce its forehead on this thing. It will be very kind and polite and just, do that for me. And he's still doing his twirling, and something occurs to me. He's ex-military. I said, in the military, did you ever come across a situation like this? And he says, yes, we did encounter wild boar at one point. And I said, what did you do? And he said, well, I was in a tank at the time. And I'm not kidding. And the thing is like 100 feet away at this point, and we have no choice but to stand there. And it was actually, it wasn't really heroic because there was nothing else we could do, but, we were actually, standing our ground, so to speak, there and going to make a go of it. And that's when the pig kind of blew our minds, because this was the only manifestation of our panic. We had forgotten that pigs can swim. So about 40 feet away from us, it just veered off into the water and swam away, making us look like total jerk dumbasses. But yeah, so that is in in the novel, because that is inherently dramatic if you take out some of the time you have to think about it. Alligators, I'm sure you all would agree, are basically like furry basset hounds. In certain circumstances. There is a scene in what I'm going to read in a bit where someone jumps over an alligator, and my sister and I actually had to do that out at Paynes Prairie outside of Gainesville once. And there, you don't actually worry about the thing moving because it's like 25 feet long or whatever, and its head is in the rushes over here and it doesn't even see you. What you worry about is making sure you time your leap so you don't land on the damn thing's back as you're jumping across the trail. So alligators, don't really freak me out. The only thing that really freaked me out was a Florida panther, and I saw one about 15 years ago. I was hiking on this trail. I'd gone like 14 miles again, 15 miles. My legs were rubbery. I had no choice. There was nothing I could do. It appeared on the trail ahead of me. Didn't know if I was downwind or upwind at that point because I was so tired. And of course, your mind is again doing this thing where it's like, I can't be seeing a Florida panther. There's no way I'm seeing a Florida panther. This is some bizarre mutated bobcat or lynx or something. And of course, you go through the things. It has a tail. It's huge. It looks like a panther. It's coming towards me. And then you're like, oh, bleep, this is happening. And I must say that it's not in the books, but in the third book, Acceptance, some of the kind of spirit of this encounter kind of permeates the text, because when you're in a situation where you cannot control anything and you are either going to expire or be around afterwards and you have no control over that, it's a very, very defining moment in your life. And this thing kind of walked up to me contemptuously almost, and about, again, 10 feet away, I'm in panic mode at this point. It's magnified to me. It just gave me this look, and then it just wandered off into the wilderness like I wasn't even worth eating. And it was one of the most amazing experiences of my life, and one that I hope never replicates. But that is definitely in the spirit of the third book. Now, what I thought I would do is read a passage from Acceptance. There's so many spoilers in these books that sometimes I could just do a reading that's basically conjunctions and the word redacted, and I'm going to try not to do that to you. But I thought I would read a part from Acceptance where the director, and this is set in the past, the former director, but in the present of the scene, the director has snuck across the border to Area X with her kind of Lieutenant Whitby, and she's headed for this thing called the Topographical Anomaly, which is what the Southern Reach tries to call it to kind of leach the emotion out of it, which is this kind of unexplained tunnel into the ground that isn't on any maps, didn't exist before this place was closed off from civilization. And this is basically the trip into Area X to find that place. Through the door on your way to Area X, you feel a kind of pressure that bends you low. See a black horizon full of shooting stars, their trails bleeding so rich and deep across the night non-sky that you squint against the brilliance of that celestial welder's torch, a sense of teetering, of vertigo, but each time you lurch too far to one side or the other, something nudges you back toward the center, as if the edges, closer than they seem, curl up at a more severe angle. Your thoughts dart quick, then slow, something stitching between them you cannot identify. The impulse comes to stop walking, to just stand there in the corridor between the real world and Area X for an eternity. While hypnotized Whitby shuffles along, eyes closed, his face a twitching mass of tics as if he's having an intense dream. Whatever haunts him inside his own head, you've made sure he won't get lost, won't come to a halt somewhere in transit. He's tied to you by the wrists with a nylon rope, and he stumbles along behind. The molasses feeling Whitby told you to expect comes next, the sense of wading through thigh-high water, the resistance that means you are close to the end, a hint of the deep, spiraling door of light far ahead, and just in time, because stoic as you could be, Whitby's dreamwalking has begun to get to you, makes you think things look in at you. You lose the sense of where you are in relation to anything, even your own body. Are you really walking, or are you standing still and your brain just thinks your feet are lifting up, falling down, lifting up again? Until the resistance falls away like a breath held too long, and then released, and you both stumble through the door and out into Area X, with Whitby on all fours, hugging the ground, shaking convulsively, and you pulling him free and past so he won't accidentally stagger in the wrong direction and disappear forever. He's gasping like you both are gasping, from the freshness of the air, acclimating to it. Such a blue, cloudless sky, a trail that should be so familiar, but it has been decades since you saw the forgotten coast. It will take more than a moment to think of it as home. You recognize the trail more from photographs and the accounts of expedition members. No, it was here before the first invaders, was used by some of your long-ago ancestors, and has even now survived overgrown as part of Area X. Can you walk, you ask Whitby, once you've brought him back to his senses? Of course I can walk. Enthusiastic, but a kind of brittle sheen behind it, as if something has already been stripped away underneath. You don't ask him what he dreamed, what he saw. You don't want to know until you're back across. Bypassing the route to base camp, you head for the topographical anomaly, with the urgency of a ticking clock driving you, the knowledge never discussed with Whitby, that the longer you stay, the longer you seem to linger, the greater the opportunity for disaster. But the trails evoke your past, a dark stillness of the pine trees and thick underbrush mottled by a strangled light, the memory of being disoriented and lost in a thunderstorm at the age of 6, of emerging from that forest not knowing where you were. And after the storm, in the startling revelation of open space and sunlight, you'd encountered a huge alligator blocking the narrow path, with water on both sides. You'd taken a running start and jumped over it, never told your mother about the exhilaration, the way you had in mid-leap dared to glance down to see that yellow eye, that dark vertical pupil, appraise you, take you in like Area X had taken in the first expedition, and then you were over and past, running for a long time, out of sheer joy, sheer adrenaline, like you'd conquered the world. Now, nowhere is the sense of urgency more intense than while passing through the swampy forest that lies a mile or two from the border, where the woods meet a dank, black water gutter, the place where you most often saw evidence of bears and heard things rustling in the darkness of the tree cover. Whitby's often silent, and when he speaks, his questions and concerns do nothing to alleviate the pressure of that gloom, the sense of intent eternal and everlasting that occupies this stretch of land that predates Area X. The still-standing water, the oppressive blackness of a sky in which the blue peers down through the trees at startling intervals, only to be taken away again. Is this the clearing where 3 men died during the 5th expedition? Does that pond hold the bodies of men and women from the first 8th? Sometimes, immersed in these overlays, Whitby's pale, whispering form is a jolting shock, inseparable from these echoes of prior last days. Eventually, though, you cross into a more optimistic landscape, one in which you can adapt, reconcile past and present into one vision. Here, a wider path separates the continuing swamp forest from open ground, allows you a horizon of a few tall pines. There are other borders within Area X, other gauntlets, and you have passed through one to get to the topographical anomaly. Once there, you know immediately the tower isn't made of stone, and so does Whitby. Does he wish now, his expression unreadable, that you had put him through conditioning, that he'd been given all the training Central could bestow, not your half measures, your shoddy hypnotism? The tower is breathing. There is no ambiguity about it. The flesh of the circular top rises and falls with the regular rhythm of a person deep in sleep. No one mentioned this aspect in the reports. You aren't prepared for it, but how easily you acclimate, give yourself over to it, can already imagine descending, even as a part of you is floating, ascending to look down on the foolishness of this decision. Will it wake up while you're inside it? The opening leading into darkness resembles a maw more than a passageway, the underbrush around it pushed back, squashed in a rough framing circle as if some now absent serpent had once circled around it. The stairs form a curling snarl of crooked teeth. I can't go down there, Whitby says, in such a final way that he must be thinking that in the descent he would no longer be Whitby. The hollows of his face, even in that vibrant, late summer light, make him look haunted by a memory he hasn't had yet. Then I'll go, you offer, down into the gullet of the beast. Others have, if rarely, and come back, so why not you? There is a dazed panic and a coiled restraint behind your every movement that will come out later through the flesh, the bone. Months from now, you will wake sore and bruised, as if your body cannot forget what happened, and this is the only way it can express the trauma. Then the descent. Thank you.